Wyoming Territory, June 1882. The train pulled into the dusty town of Rawlins as the sun dropped low behind the hills, painting the sky in copper and rose. Tamarah Finch stepped down onto the platform with her gloved hands folded tight over her stomach, heart hammering like a caged thing. Her boots hit the dirt, and she scanned the thinning crowd. No one held a sign with her name. No tall man in a brown hat with a hopeful smile. Just townsfolk moving along, the station master hauling baggage, and two boys chasing each other through the dust. She waited. And waited. The letter from Mr. Bernard Trask had been clear. He would meet her here. He had written of needing a wife, of building a life together, of cattle and land and quiet nights by the fire. She had sold everything to come. But now, the sun had dipped below the ridge. The platform lights flickered to life. The last passenger wagon departed, and Tamarah stood alone.
"Mom."
The station master approached, wiping his forehead with a kerchief. "You waiting on someone?" "Last of the trains for the day." "Yes," she said, voice tight. "Bernard Trask. He sent for me." The man frowned. "Trask? I know of him. Lives out near El Calo. But he left town 2 days ago. Sold his place. Rode off with some woman who is not you." Tamarah's knees went weak. She gripped the post beside her. "I do not understand." "Sorry, miss. I truly am." He left her there, alone under the lantern light. Her satchel held a comb, 2 dresses, and a Bible. Not a penny to her name. Tamarah turned in a slow circle, the reality sinking in like ice through her bones. She had no family left back east. This had been her one chance. She sat on the edge of the platform and stared out at the dirt road ahead. Her eyes burned, but she would not cry. She had cried too much already in her 23 years. From the corner of her eye, she saw a horse trot into view. A tall man dismounted, leading his chestnut gelding toward the water trough. He had a worn hat pulled low, a dust-covered shirt rolled at the sleeves, and a rifle strapped to his saddle. He glanced her way and paused. "Evenin'," he said. "You all right, miss?" "No, sir," she replied, her voice calm but flat. "Not in the slightest." He walked closer, boots crunching gravel. "You waiting on someone?"
"Was."
He changed his mind. The man took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark, wind-tossed hair. "I am sorry to hear that." She nodded once. "Thank you." He hesitated, then offered his hand. "Name's Dawson Whitlow. I run cattle about an hour west of here." She looked at his hand, then up at his face. His eyes were the color of pine bark, steady, quiet, and kind. She shook his hand. "Tamarah Finch." "Miss Finch," he said, voice low and respectful. "You got anywhere to go?"
"No."
"I do not." He looked down the road, then back at her. "You hungry?" She nodded once. "Very." He helped her onto his horse, then walked beside it as they made their way through town. At the diner, he paid for a simple supper: biscuits, stew, and coffee. He did not ask questions. He just sat across from her, hands folded, letting her eat in peace. When they walked back outside, moonlight glinting off wagon wheels, she turned to him. "Thank you. I do not know what I would have done." "You do not have to figure it out alone," he said. "You are welcome to come back with me. I have a spare room. It is not much, but it is clean, and you will be safe." She blinked up at him. "Why would you do that?" He looked away, jaw tight. "Because I have seen what happens to women stranded out here. And I would not sleep tonight knowing I left you to it." Tamarah studied his face. There was no pity in his eyes, only quiet strength. "I would be grateful," she said. He helped her back onto his horse, then rode double with her through the moonlit prairie. The wind tugged at her hair, and her head rested lightly against his back. The silence between them was not awkward, it was steady, like the rhythm of hooves on packed dirt. They reached his ranch well past midnight. A modest cabin, a barn, a small corral. He led her inside, lit a lantern, and showed her the spare room. The bed was made. A pitcher of water sat on the washstand. "I will be up at dawn," he said, pausing at the door. "But you sleep as long as you need."
No rush.
Tamarah stepped closer. "You are very kind." He met her gaze. "It is not kindness. It is just what is right." She closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart thudding. For the first time since stepping off that train, she felt something close to safe. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of chickens. She pulled on her dress, washed her face, and stepped onto the porch. Dawson was already outside, chopping wood. He stopped when he saw her. "Morning. Morning. You sleep all right?" "I did. Thank you." He nodded toward the coop. "I made eggs." "You're welcome." She walked with him to the kitchen, then sat at the table while he poured 2 cups of coffee. His hands were large and calloused, but gentle as he set the mug down in front of her. Day by day, she helped around the house. Cleaning,
Cooking.
feeding the chickens. She never asked to stay, and he never asked her to leave. They just settled into each other's space.
Quietly.
Naturally. One evening, a storm rolled in. Rain drummed on the roof as they sat by the fire. Tamarah wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stared into the flames. "You said you live alone," she said softly. "No family?" Dawson stared into the fire. "Lost my wife 5 years ago. Fever took her. No children. Just me now." "I am sorry." He met her eyes. "What about you?" "I had a sister. We were in service together for years. She married. I did not. When she passed, I could not stay any longer. I thought, this mail-order marriage, it would be a new start." Dawson nodded once. "You deserved better." She looked at him. "I think I found better." He did not speak, but his eyes warmed, and he reached over to gently cover her hand with his. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm passed. But inside, something new had begun. Neither of them said the word for it, but it hung between them, steady and real. And neither of them looked away. Tamarah stood at the edge of the pasture, skirt hem brushing against the tall grass, hands still from the laundry she had just hung. She watched Dawson ride the fence line, his silhouette moving slow and sure along the ridge. The sky above him stretched wide with scattered clouds, and a pair of hawks circled high in the blue. When he returned, she met him at the gate with a tin cup of cool water. His hand brushed hers as he took it, and though neither spoke of it, the touch lingered between them longer than the warmth could explain. "You keep the place like you've known it half your life," he said after a long sip, adjusting the bridle on his gelding. She glanced toward the barn. "I was raised in a house where every chore had its hour. Habit doesn't leave easy." He led the horse into the stall and loosened the cinch. "You ever think of leaving?" "I did once," she said. "But I never had anywhere to go that felt like mine." He didn't answer, just reached for the curry comb and began brushing down the gelding's flank with slow, practiced strokes. Tamarah leaned on the stall rail, the scent of hay and warm horse filling the quiet. "I could stitch new curtains for the front room," she said after a moment. "If you have any spare muslin. I've got some tucked in the trunk. My wife used to sew when she could sit still long enough." Tamarah looked down. "Would you rather I not?" Dawson shook his head. "I'd like that. I'd like it a lot." She watched him work, the rhythm of his hand steady, the lines around his mouth softening with the task. The silence was companionable, not something to fill, just something to share. Later, while she peeled potatoes at the table, he came in with a shallow scrape on his forearm, caught on a barbed wire splice. She rose without thinking, fetched a clean cloth, and dipped it in warm water from the kettle. "You don't have to," he started. "I know," she said, gently dabbing the blood away. "Hold still." He sat, letting her tend him. The scrape was shallow, but she worked carefully, tying a narrow strip of linen around it when she finished. "You take care like a woman who's done it before," he said, flexing his fingers. "I nursed my sister through a winter fever," she replied. "Learned out of need." He reached for her wrist before she could pull away, fingers closing around it with a quiet certainty. "I don't say all the things I think. That's never been my way." Her breath caught, but she didn't move. "What do you think?" "That you've brought something into this house I didn't know I missed." They sat that way in the stillness, her hand in his, the ticking of the wall clock the only sound between them. That evening, she brought in a basket of eggs from the coop and found him sitting on the porch, carving something with his pocket knife. She took the rocker beside him, watching the curl of wood fall to the floorboards. "What is it?" she asked. He turned it in his hand. "A spoon. For the kitchen. Thought you might use it." She smiled, studying the shape. "It's strong in the middle." "Figured it should be," he said. "Most things worth keeping are." Over the next days, they fell into a rhythm that didn't require speaking. She mended what needed mending, fed the chickens, swept the porch. He fixed the corral gate, checked the stock, hauled firewood for the cooler nights. They passed each other tools, shared bread without fanfare, and stood together to watch the dusk settle over the hills. One morning, after the sun had risen, she brought in the wash and found him standing near the hearth, holding something wrapped in a cloth bundle. He cleared his throat. "This was hers. My wife's. I kept it because it felt wrong to throw away something she made. But it's time it had a purpose again." He unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing a simple apron, faded from washing but neatly stitched along the edges. Tamarah reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric. "Are you certain?" "I am." She folded it over her arm and looked up at him. "Then I'll wear it with respect." That night, as the wind picked up and the lantern cast long shadows along the cabin walls, she sat stitching by the fire. Dawson poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one before settling across from her. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked, voice quiet. She kept her eyes on the thread in her hand. "I used to, but lately, I've been more at peace not knowing." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking," he said after a pause, "that peace is worth holding on to. And maybe building something with someone who knows what it costs." Her hand stilled on the fabric. She looked at him, his face open in the firelight, no trace of pretense. "I never wanted charity," she said. "This isn't that," he replied. "It's a man offering you a place not because you need it, but because he does." She folded her sewing and set it aside. "I don't want to be just another shadow in a house you once filled with someone else." "You're not," he said, standing. "You're something all your own." He held out his hand, not as a command, but an invitation. She stood and took it. And in the hush of that room, with the wind tugging at the shutters and the fire burning low, they crossed the distance between what was and what could be. Neither rushed the moment. Love didn't need declaring. It was already there in the stitched curtains, in the carved spoon, in the quiet agreement that 2 lives could join not in haste, but in hard-earned trust. And when he led her to the doorway, looking out over the land he once kept alone, Tamarah leaned into his side. This was not the future she was promised. It was better, because it was real. The first frost came early that year. Tamarah woke to a thin sheet of ice glinting across the water trough, and a hush in the air that made her pause before stepping onto the porch. Her breath left a cloud in front of her as she wrapped Dawson's old wool coat tighter around her waist. The sleeves hung past her wrists, but the warmth was real. Inside, he was pulling on his boots, quiet as always in the morning. He glanced up as she stepped in, nodding once. "Fence down near the creek," he said. "Cattle push through sometime in the night. I'll be gone a while. Do you want me to ride out and bring the herd back while you mend?" His hand paused at the buckle. "You sure?" She nodded. "You trust me with your horse?" "I trust you with more than that." They left together, her riding his mare with the white blaze, him leading with tools across his saddle. At the fork, he gave her a look that lingered longer than the silence between them, then turned off along the ridge. She rode alone across the lower pasture, the sky pale and brittle with cold. The cattle had scattered, grazing close to the riverbank. Tamarah clicked her tongue and urged the mare forward, drawing the herd back with slow, steady movements. The sun had risen higher by the time she reached the top of the hill, the animals moving in the right direction, her hands stiff from gripping the reins. When she returned to the cabin, she found Dawson already home, shirt damp with sweat, one sleeve torn where the wire had caught him again. He was boiling water on the stove, the kettle hissing. "You ride well," he said, eyes flicking to her boots as she stepped down. "I learned early. My father worked mules. He taught me how to ride bareback before I could read." He poured 2 cups and pushed one toward her. "You ever miss it? The life you had before?" "I miss pieces," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug. "But not enough to go back." He sat, rubbing his thumb along the rim of his cup. "I've been thinking of adding another stall. The mare's with foal, and we'll need the space come spring." Tamarah looked up from her drink. "You planning to keep the colt?" "Wouldn't sell it off without seeing how it turns out. Something that's born here ought to have a chance to stay." She watched his face, the way he said it, not just about the horse. Her voice softened. "You ever think about what you want this place to be in 5 years?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quiet.
Honest.
Shared. She stood and crossed to the window, watching the wind move through the grass. "I'd like to plant a kitchen garden. Tomatoes, maybe.
Beans.
Something that grows up strong." He rose and joined her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his side. "Then we'll clear the ground after the frost breaks." She turned to him. "You keep saying we." "You're here now," he said. "Not as a guest. Not because I pity you. I've known the difference." Tamarah searched his face, every detail made clear in the morning light. "I never asked for more than a place to land. And I never asked for more than someone who sees the days through with me," he said. "Not out of obligation. Just because they want to." The room held still around them. Tamarah reached for his hand, not tentative, not unsure. His fingers closed around hers, firm and certain. That afternoon, they walked the back field together, measuring with their strides where the garden would go. Tamarah knelt and dug her fingers into the soil, cold and rough, but rich beneath the surface. Dawson stood beside her, watching.
"It's got life in it," she said.
"So do we," he answered. The wind picked up again, tugging at her hair. He reached out and tucked a strand behind her ear with the same care he gave to his horses, his tools, the land. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. She looked up at him. "Would you mind if I stayed for real? Not just in your home, but in your life." "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. And he meant it, every word. The first snow came on a whisper. Flakes drifted down before sunrise, soft as ash, settling across the porch rail where Dawson stood with a cup of black coffee, his other hand resting on the doorframe. Tamarah joined him, pulling her shawl tighter, her breath a thin mist beside his. "You ever seen snow fall this early?" she asked, eyes on the slow, silent descent. He shook his head. "Not in October." She leaned forward slightly, brushing a fingertip across the railing. "It's clean. Before the mud and the melt. I like it like this." He glanced sideways. "There's quiet in it. Same kind you carry." Tamarah's hand stilled. "You think I carry quiet? I don't mean silence. I mean steadiness. It's different." She turned to him, eyes narrowing with a softness that had grown sure over the weeks. "You notice more than most. I've had enough winters alone to see what's worth noticing." Inside, she stirred cornmeal into buttermilk for bread, her sleeves rolled just past the elbow. Dawson cleared a shelf in the corner, laying out hooks for her cooking tools. Neither said much while they worked, but the silence was no longer something to fill, it was something they shared. Later, while she pressed the heel of her hand into the dough, he picked up a folded paper from the table. This came in last week's post. I haven't opened it yet. She dried her hands and stepped closer. Who's it from? My cousin in Cheyenne. He's got a partner running a freight line. Wants to know if I'll take on some winter stock for them. You thinking of saying yes? He looked out the window, where the snow had thickened into a pale hush. If I do, it changes how we live. More mouths. More work. Less quiet. Is that what you want? Dawson turned back to her, folding the paper slowly. I don't know yet, but I'd want you to decide with me, not after me. Tamarah held his gaze. Then let's think on it together. That evening, she took the oil lamp into the small room where she kept her sewing basket. She pulled out a length of brown calico she'd been saving. Dawson found her there, cutting the fabric in long, even strokes. You making something new? He asked. She nodded. A cover for the cradle you keep in the loft. He stepped inside, leaning his shoulder against the doorframe. I didn't think you'd seen that. I went looking for a dry place to hang herbs. Found it under a tarp. He rubbed his jaw, voice low. We lost the baby before she ever got to use it. I meant to give it away, but... You didn't, Tamarah said gently. No, she folded the fabric once more. You want to keep it? I do, he said. I think maybe it's time it belonged to someone again. She set the cloth aside and stood. Then we'll clean it up. And if not for now, then someday. Outside, the wind changed, curling down from the hills. Dawson lit the fire while Tamarah stirred the pot of beans. They ate together at the table, no need for talk. Afterward, he reached into the cupboard and pulled down a small tin box. He slid it across the table to her. What's this? She asked. He tapped the lid. Open it. Inside lay 2 silver rings, plain but carefully kept. She ran her thumb over the smaller one, then looked up. They were my mother's and father's, he said. I've been holding on to them, waiting until I knew what to do. Tamarah didn't speak right away. She reached across the table and took his hand. You're sure? I've been sure for weeks, he said. But I wanted you to be. She closed the lid gently, her hand still in his. Then let's not wait. They married the next morning in town, before the snow deepened too far to travel. The preacher's wife brought a small bouquet of dried lavender and pine. Tamarah wore her best blue dress. Dawson wore a clean shirt and the same boots he always wore, the ones worn smooth at the edges. They said their vows with no audience but the wind and the preacher's low voice. When it was done, Dawson took her hand and didn't let go, not once, as they walked back to the wagon. The ride home was quiet, the snow muffling every sound but the creak of the wheels and the breath between them. Tamarah rested her head against his shoulder as they passed the frozen creek, the line of trees silvered with frost. That night, she stood by the fire as he bolted the door. He crossed the room, cupped her face in both hands, and kissed her slow, steady, like everything they'd built with care and time. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the house held warmth enough for 2. And for the first time in years, both of them knew they'd come through the worst of it not untouched, but made whole. Together. The days shortened toward the tail end of November, the wind taking on a bite that stung the cheeks and turned the earth crust hard by noon. Tamarah stitched by lamplight now, her hands steady despite the cold that crept into the corners of the cabin. Dawson had hung wool along the windows, and she'd hemmed each piece so it fell clean and didn't gather dust. Their life was small but ordered, every movement between them built on rhythm and regard. One morning, after the fire had been coaxed back to life, Dawson came in from the barn with his gloves stiff and his voice slower than usual. Luther Dempsey stopped by, he said, setting his hat on the peg. He's riding west. Said he passed a man on the trail asking after a woman come in on the train this summer. Said her name was Finch. She folded the dishcloth in her hands, breath still. What kind of man? Didn't say much. Just that he was dressed fine and riding a gelding that didn't match the land. Said he had a letter with your name on it. Tamarah pressed her lips together, thinking not of Bernard Trask, but the man who'd taken her sister's wages after she passed the one who'd claimed the debt fell on Tamarah after the fact. He'd said she owed for food, for linens, for the roof they'd both worked to keep. But what he wanted wasn't payment. It was control. I reckon he's looking for what he thinks he's owed, she said, voice even. Dawson stepped closer. You expect him to come here? He won't ride this far without a reason. But if he finds his way to Rawlins, he might ask the wrong person the right questions. He nodded once, then reached for the rifle by the door. Then we'll be ready. But the man never came. Days passed, then weeks, and the snow deepened until the trail into town was more guesswork than road. Tamarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and set her mind to the garden plans she'd begun to draft on scrap paper, where the rows would go, how to keep the rabbits out come spring. Dawson built her a seed box from leftover pine, the grooves along the lid carved with simple lines like wind across tall grass. She ran her fingertips over the grain and said nothing, but he saw the way her shoulders eased when she placed her wrapped bulbs inside. One night in December, they sat near the stove as the wind howled across the roof. Tamarah reached for the small tin of dried apple slices and handed one to Dawson. You ever think about your folks? She asked. His jaw worked for a moment before he answered. Not often. My father died when I was a boy. Ma passed on before I met my wife. Wasn't much left after except what I built with my own hands. She nodded, chewing slowly. Mine weren't kind, but my sister was. She left me a recipe book with notes in the margins. I'd like to cook you something from it. A winter pie, maybe. If I can get my hands on molasses. I'll trade with the McCulloughs down the ridge, he said. They keep some for baking. She smiled, small but certain. Then I'll make it right. When the next thaw came, they went down to the creek with buckets, collecting water where it ran clear beneath the broken ice. Tamarah slipped once on the bank, catching herself against a stone, and Dawson reached for her instinctively. I'm not made of glass, she said, brushing mud from her glove. I know, he said, but I'll catch you anyway. Spring crept in slowly, the snow pulling back like a tide, revealing the matted grass beneath. Tamarah planted sweet peas along the edge of the house, tucking the seeds into the soil with her bare hands. Dawson watched her from the porch, a ledger open on his knee. You reckon we'll have enough to sell come summer? He asked. If we keep the soil fed and the hail holds off, she said. The hens are laying more now, too. He tapped the pencil against the wood. Then we'll take a cart to town in July. Sell beans, eggs, and whatever else grows. Might be time folks saw what we've made. By June, the garden was thick with green. Tamarah wore a wide-brimmed straw hat as she weeded, and Dawson spent his mornings laying fence posts farther west, extending the grazing line. One evening, as the sun dipped behind a ridge, he came in with a small satchel and set it on the table. She opened it and found a bolt of soft cotton wrapped in brown paper.
For what? She asked.
For a dress, he said. For church or town or just walking through the fields. She held the fabric to her cheek. You think ahead. I think about you. That night, they lay in bed with the window cracked just enough to let in the scent of clover. Tamarah curled against him, her hand resting over his chest. Dawson. If the baby's a girl, I'd like to name her Eliza. His hand covered hers, warm and sure. Then Eliza it is. She pressed her face against his shoulder, listening to the steadiness of his breath. Outside, the land was theirs, the fence lines, the quiet paths, the rows of young plants reaching for the sky. Inside, they had built something stronger than blood or promise. built it in silence and labor, and the ache of long-ago losses healing into something whole. Come morning, Dawson rose to feed the stock, and Tamarah stood in the doorway with her hand on the curve of her belly, watching the light spread over the hills. She smiled, slow and full, then stepped into the day, her step steady with the knowing of who she was and who she was. They lived each season hand in hand, their days never grand, but always enough. And in the years that followed, the garden grew, the cradle rocked, and the cabin echoed with laughter and the soft, strong rhythm of a life built together. There was no looking back, only forward and always side by side.